Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Just before we kick into it, can we just turn that down a little bit? Is that too loud? I feel like I can answer. Just before we start, a couple of housekeeping things. Bathrooms are just to our right. If you need those at any time, if in the event of an emergency, we need to get out of here, we're going to go straight through those doors there. And there's an assembly point just against the fence, probably about 30 or 40 yards away. So pretty straightforward. The other thing is if you've got your mobile phones, if you put those on silent, that would be fantastic. You may want to use them to take some notes, and that's absolutely fine. Who's had dinner? People already had dinner? Was it good? Fantastic. I haven't had dinner, so I'm going to try and make this as short and sharp as possible. So that you get home and you take care of that. I want to sort of put something out there this evening that there's a pretty good chance that some of the things that I say tonight you're going to identify with, and some of the things I say you might need a little bit of convincing about. And the reality is that all of us have a connection, an emotional connection with food. It's just become part of the fabric of our society and community. So I will do my best to keep it nice and light, and I encourage your participation. But saying that, because we have got a lot of information we want to cover off, if we can save any questions you may have to the end, that would be great and appreciated. I have quite a big vision, and that is to, over the next 5 years, to help 2 million people. Cardiovascular and metabolic disease is a real problem across the world, and unfortunately New Zealand isn't immune to this challenge. So I encourage you, if there's stuff that you hear tonight that you want to share, by all means share it with friends, family, and if there's a way that you can implement some of it at home and help your kids, that is fantastic. So, for those who don't know, my name is Quinton. I'm a father. I've got an 8-year-old son who goes to Cambridge Primary here. I coach his rugby team. I coach the Cambridge High School First 15 rugby. And I'm also part owner of Fit Gym down in Carter's Flat. And I love my nutrition, and I love helping people. So, in order for us to get the most out of tonight, I think it will be extremely useful for us to drop the polar concept. So we've got into a habit of things being either good or bad, right or wrong. And I want us to think tonight about every food item or food-like substance sitting on a continuum somewhere between good and bad. And ultimately what determines where that is a number of factors, and none the least of which is, you as an individual. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to nutrition. There's absolutely categories of good and bad stuff, but where it actually sits on that continuum is different for every single one of us. So I encourage you to do that. Just before I start, just for a second, think to yourself why you chose to come tonight. It's not because there was nothing on TV, was it? So think what's important to you. Why is it that you're sitting here? And hopefully you can take something home in terms of a message. Bit of a clicker work, eh? No, I'm not getting any action. Do you want to just go and grab? Sorry guys, I'll carry on. Where was that last? So thinking about the reason why you're here tonight, what is it that's important to you about your nutrition and your diet? I mean, it sure as hell isn't because we don't enjoy food, right? As I said, it's become an important part of who we are. So tonight we're going to explore and hopefully answer some of those things about what's important to you. So just before we get into that, I thought I'd explain a little bit about how I came to where I am now. And the first photo on the top left, it's not very clear. I'd love to say it's me in the top right-hand corner, but it's not. I'm the big guy in the middle. And that was at age 11. I was 11 years old, and it was a swim squad photo. And it was literally that year that my personal journey began. And it wasn't this photo, but there was a photo taken that same year of me standing on the podium. I'd come third in breaststroke. I was extremely proud of myself. Except when I saw the photo, I wasn't all that excited. Somehow, at age 11, I managed to develop moves. I had man boobs. And I don't know which is more of an alarming thing, the fact that I had man boobs, or the fact that at age 11 I was worried about it. So that was me. Next to that, the two top photos, that's my mum. She's always been a health conscious lady, always watched what she ate, stuck to dietary guidelines. She was active, she used to play golf, and she loved to get out. In 1992, the top right-hand photo, that's my brother and I, with my mum. We've been chosen to play representative rugby for another under-18 team. And the tournament after which this photo was taken was for all schoolboy rugby players across South Africa who played rugby. My brother was the heaviest schoolboy to ever play in that tournament at 130 kgs at age 17. As you can see, my mum's shape had also changed. She had been following dietary guidelines, but her shape changed. The James Dean looking character just below that, that's my dad. He, on the other hand, couldn't spell diet. He didn't follow dietary guidelines. He generally went to work without having breakfast and came home with half the contents of his lunchbox still in his lunchbox. Didn't eat salads, ate a lot of meat, ate the fat on the meat. When he had vegetables, he used to put a slab of butter on top of it. It's just random. And that's why I find that a fascinating photo, because there's someone who lived by dietary guidelines and someone who didn't. And they're clearly in different shape. Bottom left, that's me in about 2010 down in Queenstown. The nice thing about being 6'5" is you can hide the extra couple of kgs quite easily. So I was 128 kgs there. I'd stopped playing sports a couple of years before that, I think. But my diets hadn't changed, so naturally the kilos started piling on. So I wasn't in a great place physically or emotionally at that time, so it was an interesting time. But then 4 years later, things had changed, you know, and I had sort of really made some good progress on my way, and in 2015 was down to 102 kgs, and I competed in the Tauranga, Puta Tauranga half Ironman. So it was quite a journey, and the thing is, when you go through something like that and you find something that starts making a real difference for you, and ultimately it's not that difficult to implement, you want to share that, you want to talk to people. Now, being South African and wanting to help people can be a real dangerous combination, because you generally go out and you want to talk to people and you tell them this is what you need to do. And after a while you realise that approach isn't really all that well received when you talk, this is what you need to do. Your diet, we need to talk about your diet, it's terrible. And so I used to be, it didn't take long, you know, for me to be the guy at the barbecue where you wanted to do one or two things. Either you wanted to stab me with a fork so you could actually have a piece of garlic bread, or you wanted to sit on the other end of the table just so you wouldn't have to have that conversation. And over a period of time, I was with ASB and then Sovereign, we did a lot of work around coaching so that we could help other people once again. And these skills as a coach became useful, but probably the most useful set of skills was that upgrade you get in your negotiation skills when you have a child. You know what I'm talking about, eh? Yeah. So those two combined sort of changed my approach. And I was genuinely interested in helping people, and I think what that ended up doing was I was prepared to go and meet people where they were at and listen to their story and their situation that got them to where they were. and ultimately work with them from there. If I had to blow my own trumpet, the strength that sticks out for me is strategy. I'm all about finding solutions for problems, and this one was no different. I knew for a fact that I wasn't the only person that was facing these sort of challenges. I mean, as you can see, my family are surrounded by people facing challenges, and so I made it a bit of a mission just to find out more around nutrition. And it's a bit like the Alice in Wonderland story, where you jump down the rabbit hole, and only once you take the jump do you realise that A, it's very interesting and exciting, and how deep does the rabbit hole go. So I want to explore an ocean tonight, because, as I said, you jump into this hole and you start uncovering information, and you realise just how challenging life is, and it shouldn't be a surprise at all that we find it so hard to diet successfully. Absolutely shouldn't be a surprise whatsoever. You look at the marketing that happens today, the food in our supermarkets, the marketing at our kids, and we've got to navigate that, and we've got to make some choices, and we're getting all these different messages that are bombarded and thrown at us around what's good, what's not. So it's really challenging. So when I speak to a lot of these people, be it at the gym or in the nutritional environment, the general underlying feeling is around guilt. And people feel really guilty that they can't do something as simple as eat healthy foods and maintain a healthy lifestyle. And then because they can't do that, they have a sense of failure. Failure that you can't do something simple. So it's sort of a bit of a self-perpetuating challenge. So today we're going to talk about the fact that it's not your fault. Okay? It's not your fault. And I've got to be honest, the first time I heard a GP doctor stand up, have we got any GPs in the room? GP stand up and publicly say that it is not the fault of people who have cardiovascular or metabolic disease, particularly diabetes and obesity. It's not their fault that they're in that position. At that stage, my mind was in a very different place, and I got quite angry because ultimately I was saying to myself, we're 100% responsible for the food that we put in our mouth, right? How can they not be responsible for that sort of thing? So we're going to look at that. So if you're someone in this room tonight who's looking for a challenge, if you've dieted before or currently dieting and you find it emotionally challenging, I think you're going to get a lot out of a session like tonight. But we know it shouldn't be a surprise. Now, that doesn't mean that we've got nothing to do and there's no personal responsibility. We've got some stuff to do, but if we can diffuse some of that tension and some of that guilt, we're already making strides in the right direction. Does it sound fair? Yeah? Cool. Fantastic. So we've got some major challenges that we face, particularly from a health perspective. Whoops. Ooh, jumping ahead. So we've got 4 there, and these are the major health problems we face today. Obviously the first one is weight, and I'll show you some stats in a second. The second one is quite a broad topic, overall health, because it covers things like exercise, movement, sleeping, mindfulness. The whole trip is quite broad. And performance, just being able to do our daily activity. So thinking about being able to go to work, come back, still energized, to have a great time with your kids, be around for sports on the weekend, whatever the case is, being energetic and vital to be able to do that. And then lastly, obviously, longevity. Is it fair to say that particularly the top 2 would be impacted by the food we consume? Yeah? Yeah. So I found a little picture. If we take stock of where things currently are, I'm going to say that we're going about finding a solution in the wrong way. And we look at those guys who are theoretically professionals renovating a house. It's not going to be a great day at the office for one of them, and it's definitely not going to turn out the way they hope, right? And I think the analogy is we're pretty much in the same space, and we're going to explore a little bit of that as we go. So to bring it closer to home, here's some stats for New Zealand. Top 10 causes of death in 2012. The numbers in the middle are the actual numbers of people that passed away for that reason. So for heart disease, 4,600, stroke, 2,100, Alzheimer's, 1,500, and diabetes, 800. I've highlighted those in green because those are preventable lifestyle diseases. Okay? Those alone are responsible for someone passing away every hour in New Zealand alone. And it's something we can do something about, which I'm excited about, but we've got something to do. I had the privilege last week, I think it was, to meet someone from Diabetes New Zealand. I'd created a program which is now online called the Sugar Fix Project, and it helps people to remove themselves from sugar and change their diet that way. And so they were quite interested to see whether there were some synergies with what they were doing, and we had a catch up. And she shared some interesting information with me. And the first one was that in New Zealand there's 240,000 people that are diabetics. 90% of those are type 2. That was generally is lifestyle related. She was saying there's a further 100,000 people out there that haven't actually been diagnosed as diabetics and that don't even know they are. There's 1.2 million people in New Zealand that are pre-diabetic. Okay, which generally means if they don't change something, it's not going to be a great future from a health perspective. That's New Zealand's bronze medal that we don't actually want. Third place, the third highest obesity rate in the OECD. A third of our population is currently obese, another third is overweight. So we've got some real challenges there. This is an international statistic. So the one that is a bit scary, the blue line, that's children aged 6 to 11. There's been a 325% increase in the rate of obesity since the 1960s to about the 2015-ish. So look at that curve, and then you've got the adult version of the same curve. Okay, so it's not looking very good on our little island. So let's look at the head one. Yeah, I have. So we have more information available now. It's fair to say we've got access to a lot of information, probably a little bit too much. Yeah. So those are just websites that I conveniently found that were 1994 that I thought you'd find a bit amusing. That's Yahoo. Imagine Yahoo putting up a website like that now. Or Amazon. That's good. But we have so much information at our fingertips. And you've got an online medical resource called PubMed, and it has 46,000 peer-reviewed medical articles on obesity. It's got 86,000 peer-reviewed articles on diabetes, and even just under 3,000 on pre-diabetics. So all this information is out there. We've got all these advances in medicine and science, yet our situation isn't looking that flash. So once again, I'm just revisiting the fact that we're probably going around finding a solution to this in the wrong way. There's a couple of concepts that we have some challenges with, or that are causing us challenges, and I'm going to talk about two particularly tonight. This is one of them. Just simple, isn't it? So eat less and move more. Everyone can go home. Thanks for coming. That's a great session. And its simplicity be very useful. But unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. We've all heard this one, and it relates to the first law of thermodynamics, which in a nutshell basically says whatever you eat, you better burn it or you're going to store it. And that's all fair and good, but it leaves up one key little piece, which is that only works in a closed system. Okay? The human body is very far from a closed system. We're jumping ahead, what's going on? There we go. So I want you to think for a second, think about wild animals, and I choose wild animals because if they're not wild, we're probably feeding them what they shouldn't be eating anyway. So think of an animal in its natural habitat. And imagine it for a second had that same approach. Just eat less than you're going to burn. What's going to happen? Sorry? It will die. Absolutely. So here we are, and we're suggesting we do something different, which A, we're not wired to do, and B, is probably not going to give us the outcome that we want. We're just not wired for that. The optimum foraging strategy for humans is actually the exact opposite. It is to eat as much as we humanly possibly can without doing a hell of a lot at all. Okay, so that is our ideal strategy. Now, unfortunately, things have changed quite a bit, but we used to have to move from place to place. And this is not a history lesson, but we used to have to move from place to place just because fruits and vegetables actually had toxins in them that stopped us from being able to eat too much of them. They needed to protect themselves. We've changed that through the agricultural era. That's why we've got all these foods that we can just keep consuming and we're fine. Never quite used to work out that way. But we want to drop weight. We want to lose weight, so we're going to dig our heels in, we're going to eat less, we're going to deprive ourselves. I mean, anyone dieted here before? Ever done it through sort of cutting your calories? Do you feel hungry? No? Was it pleasant? No, it's not pleasant, is it? No. So how long is that going to last?
Lasted a week.
Sorry?
Lasted me a week.
There we go, right? It's going to last a couple of days, you did well. So apparently the statistics are that if you make it past the first day, you're half the people that started. And if you make it past the first week, that's the other 50% almost gone too, right? So dieting is a real challenge. It is an absolute challenge, and it's because it's just not in our nature to do that. The interesting thing about this graph, so this is the people who actually participated in the fitness industry as opposed to just signed up to a gym and didn't go back again, which we've seen quite a bit of. But have we seen a curve similar to that already? Tonight, what was it? Obesity curve. So what's interesting about this graph is that it's exactly the same time as the increase in obesity. So eat less, move more, we tried that. It's just not necessarily working out the way we thought it would. Isn't it fascinating that the two things that affect your appetite is the things I suggest doing? Move more. Do you ever feel hungry after you move more? You ever felt hungry when you cut some food out? Great strategy. Alright, here's my personal favourite. Jeez, I hate this one. Everything in moderation. Wow. The food industry would love you to know and buy into this one. So let's talk about that for a second. Moderation in the chip aisle. Anyone not a sweet tooth? Anyone more of a savoury person? Yeah? Would it be easy to do moderation in the chip and cookies and not butter? Yeah, it's a bit challenging, eh? So this would be me. This is the aisle I used to dream about. That was good. This is what I look like. I think the analogy of just eat less and move more and everything in moderation. Is it fair to say that that's the advice we've been getting? Yeah, we've heard that before, as I knew. I think the thing is it doesn't particularly serve us well. It's not serving us well at the moment at all. And it's those things, and there'll be some other things too, but they're a part of the cause of that moral dilemma of feeling like a failure because you can't do it. a natural instinct is to go out and consume stuff. And we were told that we should cut back on that. So I've asked already, but has anyone tried to diet before? We have. Yes. Anyone tried different types of diets before? Yes. Fantastic. So the nice thing about dieting is it's a bit like fashion clothing, isn't it? You can try it on, give it a go. It's a piece of meat. I don't do vegetables, thank you very much. Carnivore, or I'm a vegetarian, vegan, you name it. There's always a reason, and it's funny because people really identify with diets. And I'm not picking on them, but anyone in CrossFit here? No CrossFitters. Yeah, so CrossFitters are very much around ketogenic diets, and they identify strongly with it, and it's great. I have no issue with that. But it fascinates me how we'll go from one diet to the next because we're looking for that silver bullet in more cases than not. So what does that mean? So at the moment, we have a buffet of diet options. And ultimately it's the result of a fantastic war that's been going on for the last 50 years. And it's the war of the macros, macronutrients, low carbs, high carbs, low fats, high fats, protein. Protein's done well. I don't know how, must have a great Instagram following because it's stayed out of the whole thing for most of the time. So back in 1955, President Eisenhower, he had a heart attack, and the whole of the American medical fraternity pretty much got behind the idea of we've got to do something, we've got to find out what's going on and find a solution. And there was this young physiologist, Ancel Keys, who stepped up, and he was very convinced, great conviction in his work, and he had done all the work. He, at the time, was working on starvation. That was his study, his research. And his other claim to fame was he developed the K-bar, which became the rations that the troops used in the Second World War. So he was quite an accomplished scientist. And that's him on the left. His belief was that there was a very strong correlation between saturated fat and cardiovascular disease. And so pretty much overnight, thanks to his work, and look, there's more to it than that, but he did what was called the seven country study. What happened pretty much overnight was that fat became the bad guy, and carbohydrates was in, and we needed to consume a lot because, according to his work, if you had a lot of saturated fats in your diet, then the chance of getting cardiovascular disease was heightened. So the initiative was we needed to cut out fats, we needed to reduce the amount of saturated fat we had in our diet, and interestingly enough, we managed to do that. In the 70s, a couple of important things happened, three that are relevant to us. The first being President Nixon was losing the presidential race, and one of the things that was up for debate had to do with food, and so he wanted to take that right off the table. So he and the other gentleman in that photo, Bill Butts, who was the the Secretary of Agriculture, they decided that the government would fund the production of maize and corn. At the same time, or early 70s, across in Japan, they had produced high fructose corn syrup. And so with this massive growth in maize in America, high fructose corn syrup just sort of catapulted its way into the Western diet. We grew this fear of fat back then, and the food industry just jumped on it. There was a whole new category that they created, the low-fat food industry. The only problem they had is as soon as you process the fat out of the food, it tasted like cardboard. And so they needed to replace it with something. And so what they did is they replaced a lot of that with sugar. So we substituted fat and we put in sugar to make the food palatable. In 1977, the food pyramid came into being. That's what it originally used to look like. So, yeah, sure, it did say we shouldn't have too many donuts and cookies. Sort of veggies and fruit in the middle of the row, and then we need to make sure we got a huge chunk of carbohydrates to keep us going. On the other end of the continuum, about 20 years later, there was a Swedish doctor who had some real success with an extremely low carbohydrate diet, and success in terms of illness, someone who had recovered really well from illness. I'm not too sure what it was, but that was enough to spark the other side of the equation, which we're seeing a lot of today. So you see things like paleo, ketogenic, and Banting diets, and there's more that are coming to the fore. And then you've seen this sort of 100% flip on its head, where carbohydrates is now the bad guy and fats is the good guy. So we have a huge amount of dietary advice, and unfortunately not all of it works in our favour. There's literally hundreds of diets out there, and what makes it even worse is that every single one of them can show you before and after photos of people that have had some success, right? So it's really hard to go, well, one's better than the other, because they can all produce some really good results. So it's sort of like, well, what do we do? So let's look at some of these. Anyone familiar with the Atkins diet? Yep, so what makes the Atkins diet stick out? Lots of meat and high fat, absolutely. So not only was it high fat, it was also quite high protein. Didn't really advocate too much vegetables, even though it was on there. It was certainly wasn't promoted as a vegetable diet. What about the Japanese diet? High carbs? Extremely high carbs. Okay. Any idea what they have in common? Sorry? Yeah, they do have restrictions, absolutely. Anything else? No sugar. Yes, no sugar and very little processed foods. So let's look at these guys, the Inuits and the Catawbans. So the Inuits live in Canada, or northern end of Canada, and their diet, I don't know if you can see that, 40% protein, 50% fat, 10% carbohydrates. So very little fruit and vegetables, and their food mainly came from animal sources. Okay, so really high protein. The Catawbans, on the other hand, pretty much the opposite. 10% protein, 21% fat, of which 17 was saturated, and 69% carbohydrates. They had tubers, they had starchy vegetables. They did eat some fruit, and some fresh fish. Not a hell of a lot at all. What did they have in common? So they had a couple of things in common too. They ate pretty much no processed food. They had zero sugar in their diets unless it came from a Western source. And they were outdoors and active, and we won't talk about that quite yet, but it absolutely has an impact on their health and well-being. The fantastic thing about both of their diets is that the populations were largely free of degenerative diseases. So we can learn a lot from all these guys, and I suppose the question I'll pose is it time to end the war? Is it time to get over the fats and carbohydrate war and stop looking, and this is me as a nutritionist, saying, is it time that we stop looking for that ideal, that perfect combination of carbohydrates, fats and proteins so that we know we're fueling our bodies effectively? And I'm going to argue the answer is yes, and we should really be focused on what is the outcome we want. Because ultimately, what is the outcome we want? We want to stay smaller, we want to be healthy. We don't want to be obese, and we don't want diabetes. Fit? Okay. Just before we kick into how we're going to do that, there's a couple of things that I want to just run by you. And we need to understand them first. And it's not just the interesting but not so important piece of the night, it's quite important. So the first one is a calorie the same as any other calorie? Okay, another one-liner that we've heard. Are we eating too many calories? And if we are, why are we doing that? And then lastly, what is our individual tolerance to carbohydrates? So if we look at why a calorie is not like any other calorie, we'll look at the first example on the left. It's 160 grams of almonds, and as you consume that, because it's so full of fibre, what happens is a lot of it doesn't get digested really quickly. It takes a long time to float down the intestines, and that insoluble fibre really slowly releases that into your bloodstream. And because it releases really slowly, I don't have a whiteboard today. Because it releases it really slowly into your bloodstream, the impact on your blood sugar levels and then your insulin levels is very little over time. Conversely, the opposite of the almonds would be, say, a fizzy drink. And the thing with that is, because it contains zero fibre, as soon as it hits your intestines, it starts metabolizing, and it spikes your blood sugar levels pretty quickly. So how we look at calories really shouldn't be one against the other. It should be the quality of the source that it comes from, because that will determine what impact it has on our hormones and our body as a whole. Okay, so we're going to look at a little bit about that. There's actually an ability to rate calories, and not that you need to go to this degree, but you can look at a calorie in terms of its satiety, how the food that you consume that gives you that calorie, does it make you feel full? How aggressive is that calorie? And aggressive in the sense of that similar insulin spike, does it get into your bloodstream really quickly, or does it take a little bit of time? Is it nutritious? Does it come from a good source? And then lastly, is it efficient? Is it efficient to become a fat-stored cell? Because we want something that's not that efficient. Okay? The less efficient a calorie is, the better it is for us, ultimately. Large food companies would love us to accept the fact that a calorie is a calorie. Okay? They live by it. They've done some marketing for it. So if you don't believe me, go onto YouTube and put it in. I won't mention any names, but they actually literally state, eat less, exercise more, and a calorie is a calorie. Okay, so don't believe it for a second, it ain't true. The second thing is there's a number of reasons why we do eat too many calories. So I'm not saying we need to get funny about counting calories, because that's not essential, but we do need to know that, that at the moment we're consuming too many. And the reason initially is a few things, but the first one is because we get so many more options. Is it fair to say? There's a lot of foods out there, and 11,000 new products are being manufactured every year by food companies. Okay, so it's not going to get any easier. The second thing is our portion sizes have increased a fraction by about 300% since 1950, 1960. Okay, and there's a number of reasons for that too, but obviously with that portion size increase comes the caloric increase of 300 to 600%. I'll just put that other one up. That's actually a study they did on the Last Supper, photos of the Last Supper, and even the portion sizes in the Last Supper increased by 69%. So I thought that was quite fascinating over the same period of time. Mindless eating, really closely linked. Anyone do about mindless eating? So the thing about processed foods is food companies spend a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, to engineer foods that are more palatable. They're hyper-palatable, which means that the more you get, the more you want. And I'll show you in a second why that's quite a dangerous place to be. Is anyone here affected by food marketing? Not us. What about our kids? Kids, yeah, kids absolutely. And to be honest, if you say to yourself, no, you're not affected by food marketing, it's a bad place to be. The thing about mindless eating is that generally you'll do it while you're distracted, right? So you'll do it when you're watching TV, playing on your phone, working at the computer, and you just consume stuff. And because of the nature of the food and its hyperpalatability, you don't actually realise you eat it, and you sort of reach over and say, "Oh crap, it's finished." Have you done that? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. The problem with some of these, well, not some of them, all of these highly palatable foods, is that they have a high glycemic load. And glycemic load refers to the amount of carbohydrates the food has. And so it goes into your bloodstream, and your pancreas releases or excretes insulin to try and deal with that and get it out of the bloodstream and into your cells for energy, and whatever's left it stores as fat. So the problem is, as soon as you're eating a lot of this and you have an excess amount of insulin, it unfortunately cuts off a message that goes to the brain. Now, the hormone that tells the brain that you're satisfied is called leptin, but it is extremely susceptible to what insulin has to say. So if there's too much insulin in your blood, leptin message doesn't get to your brain, which means you'll literally just keep eating. Does that make sense? Until you come back to normality and go, I can't move, you know? So it's a bit of a dangerous situation we find ourselves in. I'd just like to remind you again of the message we had before that it's not surprising that it's quite a challenge to eat healthily. That's still sticking in the back of your mind? Good. Fantastic. So there's our friend leptin doing its thing on the first slide. The purple character, that's your pancreas, and it's sort of making insulin as fast as it can because you keep throwing carbohydrates or refined carbohydrates into your diet, and ultimately the lever breaks. The lever being the message to the brain that says you're full. So just to clarify from the last slide, I'm not for a second suggesting that one carbohydrate is the same as another carbohydrate or that they're equal, and for that matter I'm not saying that all protein sources are the same, all fat sources are the same. They're quite different. And when it comes to carbohydrates, because we're on that topic, high glycemic loads are the sort of foods that are really high in carbohydrates, potentially low in fibre, and they put a load on our body in the need to create more insulin to process those carbs, and then your food in their more sort of natural raw sense, your vegetables that have fibre, they generally tend to have a lower glycemic load. So your body needs to produce less insulin to handle it. Is there a difference between glycemic index, which we've probably all seen, and glycemic load? And there is a slight difference. So glycemic index is almost a list of products based on, rated on how fast it needs to get or does get into your bloodstream. So, say for example, fizzy drink, it would have a really high glycemic index because it wants to get into your blood like this, whereas with sort of actual whole grains, we have a lot lower glycemic index. Whereas glycemic load is just how much carbohydrates it has, and as a result, how much insulin your body's going to need to process that. So why is that important? We've spoken a lot about insulin. And how once it's sort of stored the glucose or glycogen in your cells, that any excess is then stored as fat. Okay? It also acts as a blocking agent. Okay, so why is that important? Because if you have insulin in your body, the other hormone, the peptide hormone, which is up there, glucagon, which we may have never even heard of, doesn't get us a look at. Only if insulin is not present does that peptide hormone come out. And that peptide hormone is literally the opposite of insulin. So insulin comes in when our carbohydrates is too low and looks to store fat. Glucagon looks to extract the glycogen from the cells, burn it in the sense of energy, and then once it's done that in your muscle cells, and that's depleted, which generally happens after about 24 hours, then it starts looking at your body's fat stores for energy. And then your body is burning fat for energy. So, is anyone in here that wants to lose a little bit extra weight? Yeah? So that was quite an important point. Ultimately, the important thing, and I know I'm oversimplifying a process that's got a number of other facets to it as well, but the important thing is, if we can find out what is going to reduce the amount of insulin our body has, and we allow glucagon to do its thing, to come into play, to process some of that stored glycogen, and ultimately start depleting some of the energy stored as fat, then we're naturally going to be burning energy and losing weight as a result. So, the question then is, how do we keep insulin low? The nice thing about humans is we have some similarities. The hard thing about dieting is we're always trying to encapsulate everyone in the same way and say this is what you need to do, and unfortunately that's not the case. So we want to keep insulin low, and the only way we can do that is to work out what influence carbohydrates has on you as an individual. So how do we do that? Well, we do a carb test. We do a carb tolerance test, and I can't claim this document at all. Dr. Phil Maffetone, who's a GP, created a 2-week test. On this document, it tells you what to do, the stages that you'll go through, what foods are okay, what foods you need to avoid in order to make the test a success. It's really simple. You can literally start doing it tonight when you get home. You can get this document from the FitState website. It's up there now. So if you just go onto fitstate.co.nz and you go onto Q Nutrition and you go onto the programs page, it's on there. Please go home and download this file and go through the 2-week carb tolerance test. I'll tell you why, because I know, for me, my tolerance to carbohydrates is literally nothing. So any product, like a refined carbohydrate product or sugary product, has an immense impact on my insulin level. So I literally can't eat a lot of carbs to try and avoid this, which is fine, I'm okay with that. But I also know that there'll be people in this room, and there's Jamie, my colleague, is extremely tolerant to carbohydrates, and he can have a hell of a lot more than I can. So it's imperative that you as an individual go through the test, work out where you sit on the scale, because as soon as you know where you sit on the scale, you can determine how much carbohydrates you can eat, which ultimately will determine how much insulin you'll have in your body, or how much insulin it will produce. And if you can keep that nice and low, because you know where it sits, then you've won half the battle. So this is your first task. I did say that there was a little bit of a workshop aspect to it, and this will be the start of that. As I said, we want to keep it simple, and it is simple. We've got a couple of things that we'll talk about. So this is pretty much the end of tonight's session. You've got to go home, do a little bit of homework, and we'll pick up from next week. We've got a couple of things up on the board, which is our way of supporting you. If you've got a genuine interest in changing your life from a nutritional perspective, there's obviously Fit Gym would like to help you out, but there's some nutritional options as well. So we can do some coaching around the psychological aspect of dieting. We can do the actual nutritional side of it, but more on a one-to-one basis. So there are some brochures flying around, and it's got some prices and options around that. If you want to chat about those, that's all good. As I said, that's the end of our first session. Please download the carb tolerance test, and by all means start it today or tomorrow, because that'll give us an opportunity by week 3 to be able to pick up on some of that and actually answer some questions you may have. So next week's session is more around the vision, the emotion and psychology, around making some successful and lifestyle choices and strategies. So it's slightly different, it will be a lot more interactive, so please bring something you can either write with or an iPad or something like that, because we're going to do some workshopy things. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say to them. Is there any questions? Anyone have any burning questions? I know we covered quite a bit. Too easy. Fantastic. Oh, easy audience. Hey guys, thanks so much for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll be around if you've got any questions in general about the content we spoke about tonight, or if you've got any questions about how we can help you and support you in your journey, by all means come up and have a chat. Thanks very much for coming out tonight.